I'm not really sure if this qualifies as newsworthy, but it is what's happening on the feeds that I'm following. Last week, I think we talked a little bit about the Charlie Kirk. I don't really, like I've said, I'm not really interested in talking about the Charlie Kirk. What I'm more fascinated by is how other people are fascinated by it and what the reaction is. And the reason I consider this news is because it's been showing up on my feed, and Andrew Wilson was once again on the Joe Rogan podcast, but he was talking specifically about this for some of his time on there. And under normal circumstances, I just wouldn't talk about it. However, he's had an open challenge to Candace Owens or anybody who supports this idea that there was some sort of conspiracy theory surrounding the Charlie Kirk assassination. And he's had like a $300,000 open debate, whatever, specifically to Candace, but to anyone. And, you know, if Candace hadn't replied to it, then I probably wouldn't be responding to this whole back and forth. But I've watched a lot of Andrew Wilson's interactions from the past. I've seen how he acts a little bit differently today, not substantially differently, but just I've watched him a lot in his interactions. And then I saw the clip from Candace where I say the clip. I've never listened to a full episode of Candace Owens. Like I've never even looked it up. Maybe that's something I should try doing at some point. But the clip that I saw was her kind of like showing clips of Andrew, and it looked like, I think she's smarter than this, but it looked like she was sort of like in real time evaluating who he was. And I think this is going to be interesting because watching Andrew Wilson from the whatever podcast to where he's at now. In fact, I just was listening to one of his, I get clips of his that are pretty lengthy, and it's him talking about something or other. And he has reasoning tactics that are interesting. Now, I've heard him on Piers Morgan. I've heard him on his own show. I've heard him on the whatever podcast. And I saw a pretty lengthy clip, probably 20 minutes of him on PBD as well. I think that's what it's called. I hope I got that right. We're Uncredible, so it doesn't matter. What I find interesting about him is he presents himself as logical, but I've seen when he gets into a corner some of the tactics that he uses, like rather than addressing the specific argument that the person is presenting, he'll revert to a standard response. And like the one clip that I saw this week, and keep in mind, I wasn't really preparing to talk about this. I just kind of decided to talk about it. I think it was yesterday was when I saw the Candace Owens clip, and I was like, oh, so she's thinking about, she's saying she's thinking about, you know, going through with this with him. And I think that would be interesting. But I remember listening to a clip, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, who knows when this was recorded, but this lady was, I forget what she was arguing. She was arguing about, it was about this Charlie Kirk thing, and she was saying she was a medical nurse or a trauma nurse or whatever. And I felt like there were arguments that Andrew could have used to explain to her, because she was convinced that if you're trained a certain way, that your response, I guess the best way to sum up her argument was, if you've been trained in medical response, in order to respond differently than the way you were trained, you would have to make an intellectual decision not to do what you were trained, because it's muscle memory, and you would have to. And I was listening to that thinking to myself, that's just fundamentally untrue. But rather than walk her through that, because she was coming at it from an experienced trauma nurse, I think, and maybe for her that's true, but I know plenty of people who've been through like CPR training. When things actually go down, they panic and they do the dumbest stuff. Like I work at a place where we have protocol when somebody gets hurt, people never follow it, and it's like, oh, we train on this. Yeah, and people in intense situations, people get stupid real fast. And that's not to say they're stupid. It's just to say you don't know how you're going to react to a certain type of situation until it happens. And, you know, if someone's bleeding, I mean, you got shots fired, you've got an enormous amount of blood. You've got the safety of a high-profile person. There's probably protocol that TPUSA had for the whole situation. And I'm guessing they flubbed all the way around. But all that to say, in this little discussion, he had a caller calling in. So it wasn't like a debate. And he kept saying to her, what evidence? He just repeated over and over, what evidence do you have? What evidence do you have that there was foul play? And she kept suggesting that her evidence was people who are trained this way would have to make a conscious decision to not act that way. And I think there's something to be said where he could have just addressed that argument, but he didn't. So, and I've seen him do this on like the Whatever podcast as well, where whether he gets frustrated or he doesn't like the person he's dealing with, or maybe he can't think of in the moment he can't think of a way to respond, which is tough for me to believe because he seems very intelligent in terms of the way he speaks and thinks, and intentional. Not only intelligent but intentional. Like he's very logical, or at least he presents as very logical. And I've seen him do this thing where he just repeats the same thing over and over rather than giving a good faith, rather than believing that the person he's dealing with is giving a good faith argument and then he gives a good faith response to that argument. He just sort of starts, drilling into them. Like one thing I've seen him do on, not just him, but I've seen him do specifically on Piers Morgan is answer the question, answer the question, answer the question. And it's like, why? It's like he doesn't get the answer he wants for his question, but the person he's debating obviously knows that if they answer in the affirmative or the negative, he's going to then go on a diatribe about how whatever his point is. And so they're avoiding that diatribe. So that's my take on him, is that he's very skilled. I don't know if debater is the right word, but he's good at leveraging tactics that the average person and maybe even the above average person would be able to attack. I don't know where Candace falls, because every time I've seen a clip of Candace, and again, full disclosure, Uncredible, I've never watched a full Candace Owens anything, never once. It just, the clips come up in, you're scrolling. So, but what I've noticed about her, and I've seen, well, I guess I'd just be connecting her with somebody else if I did that. She likes to do the thing where she acts like there's an obvious question involved, like raising suspicion about something that maybe there's the way somebody said something. And the thing that I saw this week from her, which I thought, she shared a clip of his, and he was on Joe Rogan, and he said, we're offering $300,000 to debate. And she stops the clip and she goes, we? Who's we? And she goes down this little rabbit trail of who's funding this. And she said something like, he doesn't seem like the type of guy who would have that kind of money. And that just speaks to either an intentional, like she's playing dumb because she wants him to come in thinking she doesn't know who she's dealing with, or she's only watched a few of his clips and she's kind of formulated this opinion of him. And the way she presented it in the clip that I saw, she shows a clip of him like berating somebody on the Whatever podcast, which I haven't seen him do that as much recently. But then she showed a couple clips and she goes, I see what kind of person he is. And I'm like, that's not, if you've been following him, he's so intentional about the way he approaches these things that he doesn't typically get to that level until the person he's dealing with is intentionally being stupid. Like he doesn't, like if he feels like they're being disingenuous, he starts to go after them a little bit more aggressively. So it is a tactic, it is a strategy. And I think when he employs it, my assessment on it has been he's not always right. Okay, so what I mean by that is when he starts in on that, where he thinks the person isn't listening or is disingenuous or is using a liberal talking point rather than thinking, it's not always the case. The other person might actually be thinking it. They're not getting a valid argument from him, and he just starts going off, whatever he does his thing. And what I found interesting, though, was the clip that I saw. She goes, who's we? And the way I had to laugh because I already did it in this podcast episode, but like when I talked about going down to run my race, Little Miami 10K, the way I presented that, which was natural to me, I didn't do it for this episode, but I actually thought about it when I said it. I was like, in my head, I was like, I'm going to talk about this in a minute anyway, so it's kind of funny that it happened. But sometimes people, I say we, I was just about to do it again. Sometimes people talk like that when they're presenting. That's a thing people do. I bet you if I were to start listening to Candace Owens, like if I were to drop back to, a couple years, I bet you I could catch her saying we. People in the spotlight when the cameras are rolling, sometimes they talk differently than how they would normally. But like I said in earlier when I was talking about the Little Miami 10K, and I'll probably do it again later when I get to the main topic, I said we got there to run the race, and my kids didn't run the race. So what I'm saying is it's like a collective we, me and my family got there, and then I say to run the race. Again, all I'm doing there is, I don't know. I honestly don't know what it is, but there's this like disassociation from the conversation where you want to be inclusive to the audience that you're dealing with. So sometimes it has to do with like we trying to relate to the person watching or listening to it. Sometimes it's trying to include your whole family. I don't know what it is, to be honest. I do it all the time in speaking, but my assumption is that other people are like I used it during the race conversation. I don't even know why, other than the fact that I wanted to include that my son and my daughter went with me. So they didn't run the race, but they were a part of that whole process with me. So all that to say, like when Andrew Wilson says we are offering $300,000, it could be him and his wife, right? He might be including his family in that, or the way Candace insinuated, or there's some secret conspiracy that TPUSA has paid Andrew Wilson to do this debate. It's like you have no evidence of that, and I'm fully convinced that if he was challenged with that, he would be like, well, where's your evidence that TPUSA paid for it, right? It's like, and that would be a moot point. The debate wouldn't go anywhere. But as I look at their two debate styles and discussion styles, it would be interesting to see, because they both utilize tactics. Let me say it this way. Everyone, when they're in a debate and they're caught, they use tactics to get around it. And some people are better than others at handling that. There was a recent debate that I only heard part of. Oh, who are the two people? It was the lady from the Young Turks and, what's her name? Shoot, I can't think of her name. But the lady from the Young Turks was doing what she does best. She was just presenting. And the lady she was facing off against, Pearl. I can't think of her name. Maybe her name's Pearl. It's the show's Pearl Daily. She does a lot of like, well, you could look it up. That's about as far as I can go with it, because I can't think of what her if she has a full name. Is the first name Pearl? I don't know. But they were having a debate, and Pearl shuts down completely. Completely shuts down. Like, didn't do well in the debate. And she acknowledged that on her podcast. Why? And again, I don't think she had adequate tools, and I'm not saying good, bad, or indifferent, but I just don't think she had the tactics that she, practiced to. She just wanted to have a conversation. She wanted to have a discussion, and she wasn't employing these tactics. So in the public debate situation, she couldn't pivot to something that was disingenuous, which I think everyone does it on some level, because you're trying to win a debate when you're in a debate, or when you're speaking publicly. Whenever you're challenged publicly, everyone has this thing where you want to believe that you've thought things through. And when you get hit with something you really haven't thought about or you don't fully understand, we all have these stall tactics. I used to talk about it in public speaking, where it's sort of like filler words, like, right? I'm sitting here using it all the time. We were taught not to, but in a podcast, I just try to be as normal as possible. But there are certain do it again. See, when I start thinking about it, now you start doing it. But when I was training to preach in a class called homiletics, they would look at and evaluate repetitive words. Now, for a lot of people, it's the word like. Other people might have Is another one. There's all these words that people use to fill blank space while their mind catches up with their thoughts. And so you're speaking and you're thinking ahead of yourself and you're just constantly chasing it. And it's normal behavior. But when you get really, really good at it, then you start to, like, when you're on a one-person podcast, like let's say, let's say something were to happen right now. I might have a stall tactic to try to get past it. Like I might try to click here and fix something real quick, but I'll say something to fill that time while I think about something else. We all do that on some level, but when you get to a professional level of that, especially with debate, it can be very effective for people who aren't trained, but when you have two people who are very effective at two different ways of doing it, it can be very interesting to see. And so I guess right now, the way it stands with Candace and Andrew Wilson is they're coming to terms, right? So there's an amount of money. I think the clip I saw, Candace was saying, well, if TPUSA, she has this hunch that TPUSA is funding it, so she asked for more money, I think was the plan. She's also 7 months pregnant, so there was some detail there that mattered. And then apparently they were on Twitter last night or the night before going over details and whatever. And what I assume is going to happen is they're not going to come to an agreement. But when I look at it, it would be a very interesting conversation between the two of them. It would be entertaining, which we've talked about this before, but a lot of this Charlie Kirk stuff, it's entertainment. Unfortunately, it's a weird thing to be entertained by. But that's what it is. And this would be entertaining. This would be two high-profile people who I don't know how big Andrew Wilson is. He's been on Rogan twice in the last couple of months. That's pretty big. And his wife was on in the middle of that too. So he, obviously big enough to get on that podcast. And I don't know how big Candace Owens is, but she's pretty big. So my hunch is that in terms of visibility, I feel like Andrew would benefit more from this, like in terms of pull, but they might be pretty equal in terms of their pull, numbers of people and things like that. But it would be entertaining. It would definitely be two groups of different people watching. So like I doubt the Candace Owens watchers are also watching Andrew Wilson. And like in my case, I've seen Andrew Wilson on stuff. I don't listen to him exclusively or specifically, but I've seen him on a lot of stuff. And I do look forward to, like, if he's going to be on Piers Morgan or if I see he's going to be on Rogan, I do like listening to him. I think he does a good job. But my assessment of Candace in the clip that I saw of the way she was describing Andrew, I think she's underestimating him quite a bit, and I think that's a mistake. If I was going to put Andrew into some kind of a box to deal with, the best clip, and I didn't pull it up, but there's a clip out there of him on I think it's called the PBD podcast, where he gets asked about children or something. I can't remember what it was, but he gets real emotional because first of all, it was a sincere question that they didn't know the background to it. I don't think they knew what they were getting into when they asked him this question. And he was forced to tell the story about losing one of his children I think it was a car accident or something like that. And you really get to see what's at the heart of the man. The clip that Candace used was to try to, like, give an idea of what type of person he is, was from the Whatever podcast, where somebody said some stuff about his wife and he reacted appropriately. So whether he was inappropriate or not, he reacted to that and basically gave back what he was being given. But when you look at and a lot of times you see Andrew Wilson, he's just sort of like very strict in his approach, very logical, doesn't get too emotional, but he does get pretty intense at times, but not really, mostly stays logical with his demeanor. And in the PBD podcast, it's one of the few times I've seen him really not necessarily break out of that, but have to really discuss something that was hard and personal to him. And I think that's where, if you're going to try to, like, understand the man and deal with him personally, and if you're going to debate him, that's where you'd want to go, because not saying you would attack that. It was just to get an understanding of who the person is you're dealing with. That's where I would go. Because for a brief moment, you see him step out of this, he stays in it to some degree, but you see that there's more to him than just this persona. And that's why, she seems to think that this is a little bit of a show, that he's being paid to do this and all this. I think the guy is just doing what, she's like, I don't even know where a guy like him would get $300,000. Well, he's pretty big online, pretty well known. He's done Piers Morgan a number of times. Just recently started doing Rogan. He's well enough known, but I honestly don't think his money came from that. I think it came from, I think I saw an episode of the first time he was on Rogan where he explained that he used to be an engineer of some kind. So, and he got into this when COVID happened and he was kind of working from home. I think that's how the story went. But all that to say, he could have the money to do this, especially if he's making a lot of money doing what he's doing with the podcasting and the streaming. He's more than capable of having that money himself. And he probably knows, he's a smart guy, that a debate with Candace Owens would draw. Like, that would draw a lot of people to watch, listen, disagree, interact, which would be views, which would be advertising revenue. So that's how this thing works. So I think she might be misjudging him a little bit. But all that to say, she's also putting that on the internet. So it might be one of two things. She might be presenting that way so that he comes in thinking she thinks that way and thinks it'll be easy, or she just hasn't gotten around to it yet to spend some time listening to more of his content. But I do think this would be very interesting to see how they both dealt with like each other's tactics, because they both have tactics that they use. They both, Candace is big on the she often doesn't say her conclusion. She just insinuates it and it's like, oh, isn't it obvious what happened? And you're like, I know what you're insinuating, but she didn't actually say that. So then when she gets called out for saying that, she can say she didn't say that. So it's this weird game, right? And I could see it turning into, I never said that. Yeah, you said it here. No, that's not what I said, or that's not what I meant. So you could see a lot of back and forth. Like I heard Andrew try to explain what her view is, and I could see her saying, I never said that. That's not my view. I'm just trying to get to the bottom of this. Like that back and forth. So, anyway, I would definitely be interested in the debate. I think it would be very cool. I think it would be interesting to see those two go back and forth, see how their communication styles would mesh or not mesh. And then my bet is, though, that neither one of them will do this debate. And I say that because first of all, they're getting a lot of views, clicks, whatever, shares, comments, all that social media clout right now they're getting just from having the conversation. If it happens, it'll probably happen with rules that are weird, which hopefully not. It'd be nice to just see it happen. But what I think is going to happen is they won't be able to come to a final conclusion. I think, Candace is going to want this or Andrew's going to want that, and they're not going to come to an agreement. And then they will separately on their respective shows say, oh, well, I wanted to have this debate, but Andrew didn't like this aspect of it. Or I would have done it. I was offering all the money, and she just wouldn't agree to terms. So it could turn into that too. And really, they're getting a lot of the benefits of doing it without even doing it right now. So just talking about it. But I would love to see it happen. In fact, I would love to see the money element go away and the rules part of it go away, and just see both of them get invited onto Piers Morgan and just do it there, because that would be just as effective. Have Piers Morgan do a whole show where he just lets both of them go at it, and he kind of moderates. I think that would be just as beneficial from my perspective, certainly just as entertaining. And hey, Piers gets the rub there too, so that'd be cool.
No quit, no quit, no quit. Building their wall, while they talk about us, all they talk about us. Educated, experienced, still not credible. So we embraced it. Now we're uncredible.